paradrama tales. She was supposed to stand beside me in a dress we picked out together. Instead, she stayed home crying over her dog. Now she's engaged and wants me to be her maid of honor. Am I heartless for saying no, or just finally honest? Being sisters doesn't mean being simple. There are families where love is tidy, where relationships unfold without resistance, and support shows up exactly when and where it should. Ours wasn't like that. Not growing up, not as adults, and certainly not now. My sister and I, we've always been close. In the way magnets are close, sometimes drawn together, sometimes pushing apart. We loved each other, yes, deeply, but there was always this layer of tension. She's older, 4 years ahead of me in age, and miles ahead of me in sensitivity. A walking storm of emotions, passionate, impulsive, the type who can cry at a commercial or start a fight in a whisper. I, on the other hand, have always been more guarded. Not cold, just careful. I analyze before reacting, hold my breath in emotional waters where she dives head first. I've been called the stronger one in the family, which is really just code for you don't break down in public. So our relationship has always been a careful balancing act. Her feelings, my stability, her needs, my patience. And for the most part, I didn't mind it. I understood her wiring. I gave her space when she needed it. I let her drama play out without always needing a resolution. That's what sisters do, right? But what no one really tells you is that patience can become a quiet form of self-betrayal. That showing up for someone who constantly leaves you emotionally winded starts to wear grooves into your sense of worth. By the time my wedding came around, I thought we were in a good place. We had gone dress shopping together. She laughed at my indecision over flower arrangements. She texted me countdowns and Pinterest screenshots and insisted on giving a toast she hadn't even written yet. She was going to be my maid of honor. And I believed her, despite all the late-night arguments over nonsense, despite the times she ghosted our plans for her moods, despite how often she made her emotions the center of every room. I believed that this time, she'd be there, because this wasn't just any moment. This was my moment. But when her dog died, everything changed. Suddenly, her grief took up all the air in the room. She called sobbing, said she couldn't bear to come, that she was too broken to stand beside me, that it was just too much. And in a blink, I went from bride with a sister to bride with an empty seat. It's not that I didn't sympathize. I did. I know how much she loved that dog. It had been with her since college. It was her companion through heartbreaks, through job changes, through everything. But something in me broke when she chose that grief over me. And for the first time in our lives, I stopped bending. I didn't fight. I didn't yell. I didn't beg her to reconsider. I just quietly folded the extra place card in half and tried to have a beautiful day without her. There's a kind of silence that shows up in celebration. It's not the absence of music or laughter or clinking glasses. It's the stillness in your chest when someone who should be there isn't. And for me, that silence wore the shape of my sister. My wedding day was beautiful. I won't pretend it wasn't. The sky was gentle, cloudless. The ceremony space glowed with candles and late autumn light. My partner stood at the end of the aisle, teary-eyed and steady. The guests were warm and generous. The food was rich. The toasts made people laugh. But under all of it, there was a thread pulled loose. A thread only I could feel unraveling. I woke up that morning still hoping she'd change her mind. Maybe she'd show up last minute, mascara smudged from crying, clutching a bouquet and whispering, I couldn't miss it. I kept my phone near me all day just in case. But the message never came. The call never buzzed. And as the hours passed, the reality settled in. She wasn't coming. The dress I helped her choose hung untouched in the guest room. Her name was printed in the program, her seat at the front marked Maid of Honor. But she wasn't there to give a speech. She wasn't there to help me fix the strap on my dress when it slipped. She wasn't standing behind me in the pictures. Instead, that space, the one meant for her, stayed empty. My best friend stepped in to help, quietly pinning my veil, adjusting chairs, handing me tissues. And while she was incredible, gracious, everything a friend should be, it wasn't the same. Because it wasn't about needing help. It was about wanting her presence, her laughter, her steadying hand as I walked toward the next chapter of my life. Instead, every time someone asked, "Where's your sister?" I had to smile and say, "She couldn't make it." Every time I heard the song we were supposed to dance to, a silly 90s throwback we both loved, I heard only the echo. It was grief in a place of joy, and I didn't know how to hold both at once. I tried to push it down, to remind myself this was still my day, still something to treasure. And it was, truly. But if weddings are about shared memories, about roots and bonds and lifelong witnesses, then I couldn't ignore that mine had a missing witness. Later, during the final dance, I stood at the edge of the room and looked out at everyone swaying, arms around loved ones. And I felt this tug inside me, a mix of hurt and clarity. She hadn't just skipped a party. She'd stepped away from a promise, one she made to me. And whether it was because of grief or habit or just who she is, it left a bruise I hadn't expected to carry. So when people say, "It's just one day," I want to tell them, no, it's not. It's a page in a lifelong story. And once it's blank, you can't rewrite it. I've tried, really tried, to see that day through her eyes. To remember that grief doesn't always arrive dressed for the occasion. That sometimes it comes suddenly, claws out, ruthless. That when her dog died, it wasn't just a pet to her. It was her companion, her constant, her family. Max had been there for 14 years, through heartbreaks and layoffs and quiet Friday nights with takeout and wine. He had curled beside her during the worst panic attacks, licked her tears off her cheeks during breakups, barked protectively at anyone who got too close too fast. He was her shadow, her child in fur. So when he died, I understand that something in her broke. And I get it. I do. We all grieve differently. But even in that truth, there's a hard line I can't ignore. Because grief doesn't have to mean disappearance. It doesn't have to mean vanishing from someone else's most meaningful day without even trying to show up. It wasn't like I didn't offer her options. I told her she didn't have to stay long, that she could skip the reception, that we'd make space for her to leave early, or cry in private, or bring someone for support. She said no. She said she was too emotionally fragile to witness joy, especially mine, and that's the part that quietly fractured something between us. Not just the decision, but what it said, because her message was clear. Her grief mattered more than my happiness. Her loss eclipsed my milestone. And I know how that sounds. Cold, maybe even unfair. But it's the truth that still lingers in the back of my throat every time I try to talk about it. You see, I didn't want her to pretend to be okay. I just wanted her to try. I wanted her to say, "You're my sister, and I'll do my best." Even if she broke down halfway through the vows. Even if she sat in the back quietly. Even if she left right after the ceremony. Because showing up, even in brokenness, is love. Instead, she chose to fold into her own sadness, leaving me to carry both our feelings. And when people asked where she was, I couldn't bring myself to say, "Her dog died," because I knew they'd look at me like I was overreacting, like it wasn't a big deal, like I should just understand. And maybe they're right. Maybe I should have. But shoulds don't heal wounds. Here's what they don't tell you about grief and love and family. One doesn't cancel the other. But sometimes one gets louder. And the thing that hurt most was that when she had to choose between honoring Max and honoring me, she didn't try to do both. That choice, more than the absence itself, is what created the divide. A silent, aching divide that stretched wider than the aisle I walked down without her. After the wedding, there were no dramatic arguments, no screaming voicemails, no midnight texts begging for forgiveness. Just silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that grows in the wake of something unspoken, something unresolved. At first, I expected her to reach out, maybe not the next day, but eventually. I imagined a text, a letter, something like, "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I wanted to be. I just couldn't. But it didn't come. And the days stretched into weeks. We sent each other the usual obligatory messages, a happy birthday text, a thumbs up on a social media post, a forwarded meme now and then. But none of it touched the thing between us. None of it addressed the quiet. It's strange the way grief and hurt can live side by side in the same family, each one convinced it has the higher ground. She lost her dog. Her world was shaken. I lost my sister, not permanently, but emotionally, and my joy was dimmed. We both carried grief, but neither of us knew how to hold the others. And the truth is, I think we were both waiting for the other person to go first. She wanted me to say, "I understand. You were hurting. I forgive you." I wanted her to say, "I'm sorry. I let you down. I should have shown up." But neither of us said what the other needed to hear. So instead, we sat in a kind of emotional holding pattern, circling but never landing. Every time I opened our message thread, I thought about writing something. I'd stare at the blinking cursor, trying to figure out if I was still hurt or just tired. Because silence doesn't always mean anger. Sometimes it just means weariness. Sometimes it means you've told yourself the story so many times you no longer have the energy to narrate it again. And that's where I found myself, stuck between love and fatigue. I still loved her, of course. That never stopped. But love isn't always enough to break the silence. Not when you've been carrying the weight of someone else's absence on what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life. And when people asked me how we were, I'd say, "We're okay." Because that's what you say when you can't explain a silence without unraveling a wound. But I felt it every time something big happened, every time I had good news, every time I needed a sister. There was this small, stubborn part of me that thought, "You weren't there when I needed you. Why should I keep reaching for you now?" And yet, I missed her. Because grief may build walls, but memory leaves doors. I kept thinking, maybe one day we'd talk. Maybe one day the silence would break. Maybe one day I'd stop expecting her to go first. And I'd figure out if I even wanted to go at all. It came as a text, like most news does these days. A photo of her left hand, slightly out of focus, with a modest but beautiful ring catching the afternoon light. No caption, just sparkles, and the familiar silence between us, now dressed up as an announcement. I stared at the image longer than I needed to, not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because something about it made my chest ache. I wasn't angry she was getting married. I wasn't even surprised. What surprised me was how quickly she reached out, as if nothing had ever gone wrong between us, as if my wedding, the one she missed, had faded like an old voicemail no one plays anymore. We exchanged the usual congratulations. I kept my tone light, pleasant. I meant it, truly. Despite everything, I still wanted her to have joy. A few days later, she called, and with the same voice that once asked me to split fries in the back seat of our parents' car, she said, "I want you to be my maid of honor." My breath caught, not because I didn't see it coming, but because I suddenly didn't know what to say. It should have been simple. We're sisters. This is what sisters do. We stand up for each other in pastel dresses. We cry during toasts. We whisper behind bouquets at the altar. But something inside me hesitated. She hadn't asked how I felt, hadn't mentioned my wedding, hadn't acknowledged that the last time we were supposed to do this, she didn't show. Instead, it was as if she had handed me a clean slate and expected me to start writing. And I couldn't. Not yet. So I told her the truth. "I love you. I'm happy for you. But I can't be your maid of honor." There was a pause, long and sharp. "What? Why?" I told her I was still hurt, that her absence on my wedding day had left a mark I hadn't quite learned how to smooth out. I told her that while I understood her grief, I couldn't ignore how forgotten I felt. And most importantly, I told her I couldn't pretend we were fine just because it was now her turn to be celebrated. Her voice cracked. She said I was being cold. She reminded me again that Max was like her child. She asked why I couldn't just be the bigger person. I didn't have a good answer, only that sometimes being the bigger person feels a lot like being the only one who's expected to carry the pain and keep smiling anyway, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore. It didn't take long. Within hours of our conversation, I got a text from our mom. She's heartbroken. She's crying in her room. I know things were messy, but do you really want to carry this into her wedding? Then another message from our aunt. You always were the calm one. Maybe this is your chance to show her what grace looks like. Grace. That word kept echoing in my head like a warning bell, as if having boundaries was the opposite of grace, as if saying, I'm not ready, was some grand act of pettiness. And suddenly I wasn't just a sister with hurt feelings, I was the villain in someone else's redemption arc. She had already cast herself in the role of the grieving girl who just needed one more chance to be loved. And I? I was now the sister who couldn't find it in her heart to forgive. They didn't say it directly, but it was in the tone, in the sighs, in the word cold, used one too many times. My refusal wasn't seen as pain. It was seen as punishment. And no one seemed interested in the context, only the consequences. Yes, her dog died. Yes, she was devastated. But I got married. And I stood there in a white dress without my maid of honor, without my sister. And the truth is, I never asked her to pay for that. I never made her beg. I never rubbed her absence in her face. I just stepped back. Silently, carefully, lovingly even. But when she needed something from me, suddenly all that pain was supposed to disappear. And when I said no, they treated it like a crime. That's what stung the most. Not the invitation, not the wedding planning, not even the tears. It was the way my feelings were discarded the moment they became inconvenient. My pain had an expiration date. Hers, apparently, was lifelong. I wanted to scream, do you think I didn't cry too? Do you think I didn't grieve? Maybe not for a dog, but for a sister I counted on. But instead, I kept quiet. I let them call me cold. Let them label me petty. Because somewhere along the way, people decided that forgiveness is supposed to be performative, that you have to show up to prove you've moved on. But I've learned that sometimes healing looks like not showing up. Sometimes it means not standing beside someone who never stood beside you. And if that makes me cold, then maybe I've finally stopped burning myself to keep everyone else warm. There's a strange kind of guilt that comes with not being ready to forgive. It's not the loud, obvious guilt you feel when you've done something wrong. It's the quieter kind, the one that settles into your bones when everyone else decides that it's time for you to move on, but your heart hasn't caught up. That's where I've been living, in that uncomfortable space between what people expect and what I can actually give. I never said I hated her. I never swore her off or wished her ill. I didn't throw her absence in her face or make her grovel. I didn't block her number. I didn't tell the world she was a bad sister. I simply stepped back. And yet somehow, that quiet decision became the most offensive thing I could have done. Because we're taught that forgiveness is a moral obligation. That if someone says, I didn't mean to hurt you, you're supposed to smile and say, it's okay. But what if it's not okay? What if intention doesn't undo impact? What if the pain still lives in you, even after the apology? Or worse, even when the apology never came? She never really said sorry. Not in the way I needed. She said she loved me. She said she was sad. She said she was going through something. But not once did she say, I know I let you down. I know I wasn't there. I know that mattered. And until she can say that, I'm not ready. Forgiven. Real forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's not something you perform because someone else wants to feel better. It's a door that opens from the inside. And mine is still locked, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm still bleeding. It's not about punishment, it's about protection. Because if I say yes to being her maid of honor, what I'm really saying is, you didn't hurt me enough to matter. What you did is something I'm willing to forget. And I'm not there. Not yet. Maybe one day I will be. Maybe one day I'll wake up and the ache will feel distant enough to forgive fully. Maybe I'll even stand beside her in another way, in another time, without resentment or hesitation. But forgiveness isn't owed on someone else's timeline, and refusing to perform it doesn't make me cruel. It makes me honest. I love my sister, but I also love myself enough to wait until I'm ready, and no amount of pressure, guilt, or wedding invitations will change that. Family comes first. It's a phrase I've heard since I was a child, stitched into birthday cards, whispered at funerals, shouted during arguments. It's the golden rule of so many families. No matter what happens, no matter how deep the hurt, you show up. But as I've gotten older, I've started to question that version of loyalty. Not because I don't value family, I do, but because I've learned that showing up for others should never require you to abandon yourself. My parents were the first to remind me of the rule. She's your sister. This is her big moment. Don't let the past ruin her future. But here's the thing. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm trying to protect what little trust I have left. There's this unspoken belief that forgiveness, especially within family, should be automatic. That time heals. That blood is thicker. That wounds fade faster when the person who hurt you shares your DNA. But in my experience, that kind of thinking has a cost. When you're constantly told to be the bigger person, what no one admits is that you're being asked to shrink, to swallow, to make space for someone else's comfort at the expense of your own clarity. It's not that I haven't forgiven her. It's that I haven't forgotten the message her absence sent me. And every time someone says, "Let it go," what I hear is, "What happened to you wasn't that bad." But it was. Because it changed the way I look at her. It changed the way I look at us. She didn't just miss a party. She missed a promise. She left me standing on a day I had imagined sharing with her since we were little girls, playing dress-up in our mother's heels. And now, she wants me to pretend that nothing happened, that we're the same sisters we were before. But we're not. And pretending we are doesn't rebuild trust. It just buries resentment. True loyalty, I've come to realize, isn't about blind allegiance. It's about mutual respect. It's about holding space for each other's joy and pain. It's about knowing when to lean in and when to step back. And right now, stepping back is the most loyal thing I can do to myself. Because if I force myself to stand beside her while still carrying unspoken hurt, I'm not showing love. I'm just performing an expectation. And one day, that performance will crack, probably at the worst possible moment. I still love her. That's never been in question. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them write the rules for your healing. And maybe, just maybe, the most honest form of family is the kind that allows space for imperfection, for time, for reflection, for silence that isn't punishment, but pause. So no, I won't wear the dress, I won't make the speech, I won't pretend, because real loyalty isn't about being there no matter what. It's about showing up when it matters most, and choosing not to show up when your presence would be a lie. We don't talk much about the cost of pretending everything's fine. We're told to keep the peace, to be forgiving, to move on because life is short and people are flawed. But what we're not told is this. Pretending you're okay before you are doesn't heal anything. It just hides the wound deeper. And I'm done pretending. I'm not angry. I'm not vindictive. I don't want revenge or to hold a grudge until my final breath. But I do want honesty, with myself most of all. And the honest truth is, I'm still healing. From her absence, from the silence that followed, from being asked to forget without being given space to feel. So no, I won't be the maid of honor. Because I can't stand beside someone in celebration while still carrying sadness they never acknowledged. Because healing isn't measured by time passed or dresses tried on. It's measured by truth. And if that truth makes me look cold, so be it. If choosing not to perform love makes others uncomfortable, so be it. Because I'd rather be misunderstood than misaligned with myself. To anyone listening who's ever felt guilty for not bouncing back, for not saying yes when you still felt broken, let me say it clearly. You are allowed to set the terms of your healing. You are allowed to say no to protect your peace. You are allowed to love someone and still not be ready to stand next to them. You are allowed to be whole on your own timeline. And if someone truly loves you, they'll wait. Not in pressure, but in patience. Not with conditions, but with compassion. Because healing isn't linear, and forgiveness isn't performance. It's a choice. And sometimes, the bravest one is silence. If you've ever had to choose between honesty and obligation, this story is for you. And if you're still figuring out how to set those boundaries, you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, complicated love, and the power of choosing yourself. Because sometimes the most powerful yes starts with a gentle, unapologetic no.